Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Pages. Today we will be exploring a highly acclaimed crime thriller, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. This novel is the first in the Millennium trilogy and continues to be a cult classic. The story follows a journalist and a brilliant but enigmatic investigator who team up to solve a decades-old disappearance, uncovering chilling secrets and dangerous truths that someone will go to great lengths to keep hidden. With that said, let's dive into this gripping story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Every November 1st, an unnamed man receives a cryptic package in the mail. For decades, someone has been sending him a pressed flower on his birthday. The species of flower changes every year, but the size of the frame and the handwriting on the envelope remain the same. At 82 years old, he still has no idea who the sender is. Over the phone, he shares the mysterious ritual with Detective Superintendent Morel, a retired policeman and one of the few remaining people intrigued by the puzzle since it began in 1967. Despite attempts to trace the postmark and decipher clues about the flower's origins, the case of the pressed flowers remains unsolved. Mikael Blomqvist is a 42-year-old respected journalist dedicated to exposing corruption in the banking and business world. Acting on a tip from an old friend, he had revealed misconduct by Hans-Erik Wennerström, the successful CEO of an investment company. However, Wennerström sued him and won the case, leaving Blomqvist facing a 3-month prison sentence and 150,000 Swedish krona in damages. Beyond the financial penalty, the case caused significant harm to his reputation as it dominated headlines. Feeling humiliated by this professional setback, he decides to step away temporarily from Millennium, the magazine he co-owns. Although the sentence isn't devastating, the public fallout weighs heavily on him. On the other side, we are introduced to Armansky, who is the head of Milton Security, a firm that specializes in private security operations and personal investigations. On the morning of Blomqvist's verdict, Armansky is in a meeting where a client has requested a full investigation on Mikael Blomqvist. The client is a retired lawyer named Frode, and Armansky has assigned this case to his company's top investigator, Lisbeth Salander. Lisbeth Salander is 24 years old and an exceptionally gifted researcher. She is considered a bit eccentric due to her piercings, tattoos, and combat boots. Even Armansky had his doubts when he first hired her because of her antisocial and insubordinate behavior, but he was impressed when she exposed security lapses in his own staff and proved herself on a confidential client's business. Impressed with her magic skills at uncovering secrets, Armansky offers Salander a research position and regards her with a mixture of attraction and charity. He had once tried to hug her after getting drunk, but Salander clearly mentioned that she appreciates his support but is looking for neither a lover nor a father. The two agree to a friendship, and Armansky promotes Salander to a freelance investigator with the right to work when and how she chooses. Anyway, back to the present day, Salander delivers her report on Mikael Blomqvist, her latest assignment. The client, Frode, is impressed with her investigation. She details Blomqvist's ordinary upbringing, decent schooling, and modest income. He has an open relationship with Erika Berger, a longtime friend and colleague, whose husband accepts the arrangement. Salander confirms Blomqvist's clean record as a reporter with integrity. She also speculates that Blomqvist may have been threatened or set up in the recent Wennerström case. Frode hires her to continue her investigation on Blomqvist and Wennerström. On the other hand, Blomqvist returns to the Millennium offices after the trial and confides in Erika about his decision to step away. Erika Berger is part owner and editor-in-chief of the publication and Blomqvist's occasional lover. She disagrees initially but agrees when Blomqvist mentions it is to protect the magazine. With her husband's knowledge, Berger spends the night with Blomqvist. In the early hours of the morning while she sleeps, Blomqvist reflects on their 20-year open relationship. Their affair began in journalism school, and after marrying other people, they started Millennium together and resumed their relationship. Despite his wife's hope that the affair would end after the birth of their daughter, Blomqvist continued to sleep with Berger. His marriage ended in divorce, whereas Berger's husband Beckman accepts Blomqvist as her lover. Blomqvist is unable to fall asleep due to the recent trial and decides that he will eventually bring Wennerström to justice. The next day, he receives a phone call from the lawyer Dirch Frode. Mind you, Frode is the same client who is currently asking for a personal investigation on Blomqvist at Milton Security. Frode invites him to visit someone in Hedestad but offers no further details. Blomqvist is initially skeptical, but when he learns that the person he is to meet is the elderly Henrik Vanger, the former industrialist with an ethical reputation, he tells Frode he will consider the invitation. Blomqvist browses the internet and compiles a quick file on Vanga, noting his declining ventures, which his grandnephew, Martin, now heads as the CEO. The day after Christmas, he arrives at Henrik Vanga's residence, a large stone farmhouse on Hedeby Island, accessible via a bridge from the main town. During their meeting, Blomqvist learns that his father once worked for Vanga and that Blomqvist spent a childhood summer on Hedeby in 1963 when he was 3 years old. Back then, Vanga's 13-year-old grandniece Harriet babysat Blomqvist. Blomqvist does not recall Harriet or his stay in Hedeby and presses Vanga to explain why he has called him back to the town. Vanga offers Blomqvist 2 assignments. The first is writing his biography and family history. Vanga has long disliked the greed and dishonesty of most of his relatives, particularly his oldest brother Richard. Richard was a Nazi leader, and after his death in 1940, his widow and son Gottfried relocated to Hedestad, where Vanga took responsibility for Gottfried's upbringing. As an adult, Gottfried struggled with alcohol addiction and had a turbulent marriage with Isabella Koenig. He eventually moved alone to a remote cabin on the island and died in an accidental drowning. Isabella was unable to care for their 2 children, Martin and Harriet, so Vanga raised them as his own, as he had no children. Vanga concludes his family history by revealing his second assignment. Under the guise of writing the family's history, Blomqvist's real objective is to investigate which family member was responsible for Harriet's disappearance and has been tormenting Vanga with mysterious pressed flowers for decades. Vanga is the same elderly man introduced at the beginning of the novel who has been receiving these flowers. He believes the person behind Harriet's disappearance is sending them to cause him distress. Henrik Vanga notes Blomqvist's interest in Harriet's story and proceeds to share details about the day she disappeared. On September 24, 1966, nearly 40 years earlier, Harriet was last seen during the children's parade in town. That same day, an oil truck crashed on the bridge, blocking all traffic. Harriet attended the parade and was later seen back on Hedeby Island between 2:10 p.m. and 2:55 p.m. She wanted to speak with Vanga about something important, but he was busy and promised to meet her later. Vanga accounts for 64 people on Hedeby that day, mostly family members attending a gathering. He is convinced that Harriet's disappearance was neither a self-unalive nor an accident, as her body was never recovered despite thorough searches. He also rejects the theory that she ran away, as the blocked bridge and watchful bystanders would have made it nearly impossible. Vanga concludes that a family member must have been involved in her disappearance and disposed of the body. Back in Stockholm, Selander continues her investigation and becomes increasingly interested in Blomqvist's integrity and thoughts. During her investigation, she easily sneaks into Wennerström's apartment building, photographs the electrical box in the basement, and leaves without arousing any suspicion. She also buys an electronic cuff used for hacking computers from a fellow hacker and returns home after a successful day of covert activities. Anyway, back to Vanga. To convince Blomqvist of his theory that Harriet was murdered, Vanga shows him photographs taken on the day of her disappearance. He theorizes that Harriet was strangled and hidden in the trunk of a car until the murderer could drive across the bridge the next day after the accident was cleared. When Blomqvist suggests that the murderer may be dead after all these years, Vanga shows him the wall of pressed flowers. He explains that Harriet had given him the first flower in 1958 as a birthday present, and every year since then, except for the year she went missing, he has received a flower in the post on his birthday. Vanga believes the murderer is still alive, and the flowers are a cruel reminder of Harriet's death. Now, at the end of his life, Vanga makes one last effort to solve the case and offers Blomqvist a 2.4 million kroner contract to stay in Hedeby for a year and conduct an investigation. Even though the money is good, Blomqvist is skeptical about accepting the offer. To convince him, Vanga promises that if Blomqvist solves the mystery, he will double his salary. More importantly, he'll provide evidence of Wennerström's corruption. Blomqvist agrees. When Blomqvist mentions this to Erika Berger, she is not very happy. Blomqvist assures Berger that he's accepting Vanga's offer to preserve Millennium's reputation by stepping away temporarily, as well as to acquire the information Vanga has on Wennerström. Berger sees Blomqvist's decision as giving up on the magazine and leaving her to manage things alone for a year. She agrees unconvincingly, wondering if he will ever return. Meanwhile, Selander receives a phone call from Armansky informing her that Frode has dropped the investigation on Blomqvist and she can discard her findings with pay. However, Selander is now intrigued and decides to continue the investigation anyway. Blomqvist arrives in Hedestad and begins to settle into his new environment. Vanga provides him with brief descriptions of the island's residents, many of whom either work for Vanga or are Vanga's relatives. After the tour, Blomqvist requests that Harriet's files be delivered to his guest house, where he plans to do all his work. Blomqvist dives into his research and learns that Detective Morell had taken charge of the investigation early on. He admires Morell's thorough and logical questioning of family members and other witnesses. On his way to Vanga's house, Blomqvist bumps into Martin, who invites him to dinner when he returns from a trip to Stockholm. Martin, Harriet's brother, is now the CEO of Vanga Corporation. Blomqvist interviews Henrik Vanga to track the growing number of family members in his research. Blomqvist narrows down his list to 23 relatives as potential suspects. Vanga shares his disdain for some of his relatives, revealing that 3 of his brothers, Richard, Harold, and Gregor, were involved in the Nazi movement. A 4th brother, Gustav, died early from lung disease and was not interested in politics or the family business. Vanga explains that Harold has despised him ever since he married Edith, a Jewish woman he helped escape Germany in 1941. Edith died in 1958 from heart disease, but Harold's hatred remains constant. Harold has 3 children, one of whom is Cecilia Vanga, who lives nearby and is separated from her violent husband. Cecilia's sister, Anita Vanga, was a close friend of Harriet and now resides in London. Back to Salander, we learn a little more about her background. After experiencing some difficult events in her early adolescence, Salander spent a couple of years first in care for emotional and psychiatric support, and then in and out of foster homes throughout her teens. Her saving grace was Palmgren, who was assigned as her trustee by the courts. By consistently treating Salander with kindness and respect, no matter how challenging her behavior, Palmgren earned her trust. That trust was tested when, at age 17, Salander was accused of defending herself against a man who behaved inappropriately toward her at a train station. Palmgren, acting as both her trustee and her lawyer, managed to keep her out of institutions by agreeing to serve as her guardian and take a supervisory role in her life. Because of their mutual trust and respect, Salander was able to live independently and manage her finances. However, her independence is now at risk because Palmgren has suffered a stroke, and she's been assigned a new guardian, Niels Björman. Björman views Palmgren as having been too lenient with Salander. He insists that control of Salander's finances should fall entirely under his guardianship and demands detailed information about her daily life. Salander, immediately distrustful of him, lies about her work, claiming she's just an office assistant rather than an investigator. By their 3rd meeting, Björman begins asking her overly personal questions, making her uncomfortable. At first, she refuses to answer, but then, realizing that refusing outright could create more problems later, she responds briefly and avoids revealing too much. However, Björman keeps pressing for increasingly private details, making Salander uneasy. She leaves the meeting realizing that her relationship with Björman is unlikely to improve and that he could become a significant obstacle. Meanwhile, Blomqvist has an enjoyable dinner with Martin and Martin's girlfriend Eva. Throughout the meal, Blomqvist wants to bring up Harriet, but since Martin doesn't mention his sister, Blomqvist assumes it's a sensitive topic. His next encounter is with Cecilia Vanga, Harold Vanga's daughter, who stops by unannounced one afternoon. After a bit of small talk, Cecilia gets straight to the point. She asks if Blomqvist's real purpose is to investigate Harriet's disappearance. Blomqvist wins her trust, and she opens up during their conversation. Cecilia suggests that Harriet's disappearance might have been a tragic accident. Later, Blomqvist visits Detective Morell to see if there's anything from the original investigation that might help. Morell admits Harriet's case has haunted him as much as it has haunted Vanga, and he assures Blomqvist that he left no detail unexplored. Morell believes one of the biggest clues lies in Harriet's strong desire to speak with Henrik Vanga on the day she disappeared, just before the bridge accident diverted everyone's attention. He suspects she might have discovered something another family member didn't want her to reveal. Blomqvist and Vanga meet every afternoon to discuss progress on the investigation. After a month of silence, Berger calls Blomqvist and visits him. They take a walk around Hedeby Island on a rare sunny day and stop by Vanga's home on their way back. Vanga begins asking Berger about Millennium's financial struggles, and after hearing about its challenges, offers to become a silent partner. After Berger leaves town, Blomqvist spends some time reflecting and then throws himself back into Harriet's case. By reading her diary and police reports, he learns that Harriet's behavior had changed in the year leading up to her disappearance. She had become more withdrawn from her friends, though she remained close to her cousin Anita Vanga. Harriet's diary also contained 5 mysterious names and numbers: Magda, Sarah, and Mari, along with the initials RJ and RL, whose meaning Morell was never able to decipher. Intrigued, Blomqvist decides to visit Cecilia Vanga to ask for more information. During the visit, Cecilia seduces him and they spend the night together. The next day, they talk about Harriet. Cecilia admits she wasn't close to Harriet, but mentions their difficult childhoods following Harriet's father's drowning. Blomqvist continues meeting with Vanga for more information while growing closer to Cecilia, whom Henrik Vanga regards as one of the few honorable members of the Vanga family. Back in the city, Salander goes to Björman's office because her laptop has broken and she needs money to get it repaired. Since Björman now manages her finances, she has to request her own funds through him. Shortly after she arrives, he behaves inappropriately and mistreats her. Although Salander is tempted to react aggressively by grabbing a letter opener on his desk, she restrains herself, knowing that violence could worsen her situation. After the incident, Björman writes her a check and warns her not to speak about what happened. Salander feels stuck, unsure how to handle the situation now that Björman has misused his authority and taken control of her finances. Having had negative experiences with authorities before, she doesn't see reporting the incident as an option. She returns home and wrestles with her predicament, realizing she has no one to trust, not her friends nor her boss at work. Determined to regain control, Salander begins to dig into Björman's past but finds nothing suspicious. He has a clean record as a lawyer and his ex-wife seems to have moved on peacefully. Salander contemplates drastic measures but realizes a replacement guardian could be just as bad or worse. Instead, she devises a plan. For her next meeting with Björman, she equips herself with a hidden camera to gather evidence. However, her plan takes an unexpected turn when Björman insists they meet at his apartment. During the meeting, he attacks her again, restraining her and mistreating her further. He lets her go the following morning, warning her to keep quiet and reminding her of their next meeting. Salander, though traumatized, has now captured undeniable evidence of his actions. Over the following days, she begins to recover physically and reflects on how people like Björman target vulnerable individuals, wrongly assuming them to be defenseless or unable to fight back. At their next meeting, Salander turns the tables. She leads Björman to his bedroom where she tases and restrains him. Using the footage she captured, she confronts him, setting strict terms for his behavior. She demands full control of her finances, positive reports from him to build a case for her release from guardianship, and unrestricted access to his office and home. She also makes it clear that he must never harm or take advantage of another person again. To ensure compliance, she warns that the video will automatically go public if anything happens to her. Salander then tattoos a visible and incriminating message on his torso, marking him as a warning to others. Meanwhile, in Hedeby, Blomqvist's relationship with Cecilia deepens, though both are unsure how to move forward. Cecilia, now feeling romantic toward Blomqvist, recalls her troubled past. Her marriage was marred by mistreatment, and her father Harold, along with her brother, unfairly blamed her for its failure. She has carried years of anger and sadness over her family's treatment and hasn't spoken to Harold in 2 decades. Shortly after, Blomqvist leaves Hedeby to serve his 90-day sentence in prison. News spreads about Vanga becoming a silent partner in Millennium. Salander hears about these developments while in Armansky's office and quickly pieces together that is connected to Vanger, who also has ties to Wennerström. With no new assignments from Armansky, Salander resumes her independent investigation into Blomqvist. After serving 2 months, Blomqvist is released early and returns to Hedeby, where Vanger is delighted to see him. He stops by Cecilia's house, but she is cold and distant, asking him to leave. Disappointed, he goes home and starts reviewing the photograph album from the day of Harriet's disappearance. At first it seems unhelpful, but a fleeting idea crosses his mind. Before he can fully grasp it, Cecilia arrives, confessing she has fallen in love with him. They spend the night together. The next morning, their peaceful time is interrupted when Berger arrives unexpectedly and finds Blomqvist with Cecilia. Both women hide their surprise and awkwardness as best they can. After a week, Cecilia decides to end her relationship with Blomqvist, and they agree to remain friends, recognizing that their current circumstances make continuing their affair impractical. Blomqvist visits Gottfried's abandoned cabin, where Harriet and Anita Vanger had spent part of their summer. The cabin is simple, containing a few paperbacks, children's books, and Harriet's Bible on a shelf. Blomqvist wonders why Harriet spent time in her father's remote cabin after his passing. Gottfried had moved there after becoming estranged from his wife Isabella and later drowned in the bay in what was deemed an accident, likely linked to his struggles with alcohol. Blomqvist considers whether the cabin might have been a place for Harriet to grieve or find peace, but it doesn't bring him any closer to understanding her disappearance. While riding the bus, Blomqvist suddenly recalls why Harriet's photograph has been troubling him. In the image, Harriet's gaze isn't on the parade but directed off-frame. Unlike the smiling crowd, her expression is tense and frightened. Blomqvist begins to suspect that Harriet may have seen someone who upset her, prompting her to leave the parade and attempt to speak with Henrik Vanger. Blomqvist shares his realization with Vanger, who grants him access to the photo archives of the Hedestad-Courier, a local newspaper owned by the Vangers. Blomqvist examines the archives and pieces together 18 consecutive photographs of Harriet at the parade. By creating a simple animation, he sees Harriet go from smiling to alarmed as her gaze shifts across the street. Additionally, another photo of Harriet's bedroom window reveals a blurry figure. Blomqvist realizes it is Cecilia Vanger, who had previously denied being in Harriet's room. This discovery leaves him uneasy, suspecting Cecilia might be hiding something. Blomqvist revisits Harriet's photo, focusing on what she might have seen. He notices a couple standing near her, taking pictures in the same direction as her line of sight. Searching through the updated archives, he finds another image of the couple by their car. From the photo, he notes part of their license plate and a bumper sticker, which leads him to a carpentry shop in Västerbotten. Blomqvist tries to confront Cecilia about her lie, but doesn't find her at home. Instead, he has his first encounter with Harold Vanger, who is sharp-tongued and hostile. Harold insults Cecilia, referring to her cruelly, and Blomqvist retorts angrily before leaving for Henrik Vanger's house. Henrik explains that Cecilia has left for London to visit her sister, Anita. He also reveals that Harold has held a grudge against Cecilia since her relationship with a young man who was part Jewish. Henrik is astonished when Blomqvist shares his recent discoveries and newfound leads. Later, Blomqvist is surprised by a visit from his 17-year-old daughter, Pernilla, who shows her support by expressing belief in his innocence and reminding him of her love. Pernilla shares an interest in religion, much like Harriet once did. Although Blomqvist doesn't fully understand or share her enthusiasm, he respects her choices, including her decision to attend a Bible summer camp. When dropping her off at the train station the next day, Pernilla notices the notes taped to his wall and encourages him to continue his study of the Bible verses. It is then that Blomqvist realizes the numbers in Harriet's diary correspond to Bible passages. Blomqvist hurries to Gottfried's cabin with his notes and Harriet's Bible. As he cross-references the names in her diary with Bible verses, he is disturbed to find that each verse describes violent punishments. He connects the initials RJ to Rebecca Jacobson, a woman whose unsolved and tragic case from 1949 was mentioned by Detective Morell. Her death matches the Bible verse listed beside her initials. However, the other names, Magda, Sarah, Mari, and RL, remain unsolved mysteries. The next day, Vanger suffers a heart attack and is rushed to the hospital. Frode steps in as Blomqvist's main contact for Harriet's case. Blomqvist shares most of his findings with Frode, but refrains from mentioning the discovery of Cecilia being in Harriet's room. He also requests a research assistant to help identify the remaining names in the diary. Frode recommends Lisbeth Salander, and Blomqvist, surprised to learn she had investigated him earlier, reads her detailed report. He realizes she is an expert hacker. In the city, Salander spends the night with her friend and casual partner, who leaves early for work the next morning. Later, Salander is startled when the doorbell rings. To her surprise, Mikael Blomqvist is at her door greeting her warmly. He brings bagels, starts making coffee, and tidies her kitchen as though they're old friends, even though they've never met before. After commending her investigative skills, he offers her a job as his research assistant. Though cautious at first, Salander finds herself intrigued by his odd friendliness and agrees to help with the case. Back at Millennium, Blomqvist meets with Berger, who shares her suspicion that their managing editor, Janne Dahlman, may be working with Wennerström. When Blomqvist returns to Hedeby, he discovers that someone has broken into his cabin and gone through his files. Alarmed, he replaces the locks and formalizes Salander's hiring contract with Frode at his home. Reflecting on their earlier conversation, Salander asks Blomqvist if he plans to report her hacking activities. Instead, Blomqvist encourages her to think about the ethics of her methods, but assures her he won't blackmail her. Salander defends her actions by explaining her personal code, Salander's Principles, which justify digging into the lives of those who have done wrong. She also admits she edits her reports when she believes the subject is a good person, choosing not to include sensitive personal details. For instance, she deliberately excluded private information about Blomqvist and Berger's relationship in her report for Frode. At the hospital where Vanger is recovering, Blomqvist meets Berger Vanger, Cecilia's brother, for the first time. Berger is dismissive and warns Blomqvist to leave the family's private matters alone. Cecilia, recently returned from London with Anita, is also at the hospital. Worried about Henrik's health, she becomes frustrated when Blomqvist attempts to discuss new developments in Harriet's case, and he backs off to avoid upsetting her. Frode visits Blomqvist later, explaining that several family members are unhappy with the ongoing investigation, but reassures him of his support. Shortly after, Martin Vanger visits Blomqvist at the guest house, reiterating the family's disapproval of his work. Martin hints that if Vanger passes away, he would take over the partnership with Millennium and might not continue supporting Blomqvist's efforts. Meanwhile, Salander begins her research into the remaining names on Harriet's list. She quickly identifies Magda as a woman who was murdered in 1960, a case that had even been dramatized in a TV series. Magda's death aligns with the Bible verse in the diary. Salander also traces RL to Raquel Lund, another victim whose tragic story matches one of the verses. Going beyond the diary, Salander discovers another name, Leah Person, whose case connects to a different Bible passage. Blomqvist drives north in search of information about the couple from the photo. After a few days of searching, he tracks down Mildred, the woman in the picture, who to his surprise still has photos from that day. It was her honeymoon. Mildred gives him 3 pictures. In one, Blomqvist spots a figure across the street but can't clearly make out their identity. Around the same time, Blomqvist learns that Martin Vanger has called Berger, pressuring him to return to Stockholm and resume his position at Millennium. When Blomqvist confronts Martin, he claims his concern is only for the magazine's welfare. Frode defends Martin's actions, explaining that Martin has been under immense stress trying to save Vanger Corporation. Additionally, Isabella Vanger has started rallying other family members to persuade Blomqvist to leave Hedeby. Salander arrives at Blomqvist's guest house on her motorbike, bringing the results of her research. She has identified the women on Harriet's list, plus 3 additional victims who were hurt and killed in ways connected to Bible passages. The dates of these cases range from 1949 to 1966. Blomqvist notices that the women's names all have a Jewish origin, leading him to suspect Vanger family members. Shocked by the idea that a serial killer could have hurt so many people undetected, Blomqvist expresses disbelief. Salander, however, bluntly calls the killer a regular hater of women and remarks that such crimes sadly are all too common. Martin visits Blomqvist with troubling news. The Hedestad Courier has published an unflattering article about him. Martin denies being involved and offers to help respond to the story, but Blomqvist believes that ignoring it is the best way to avoid unnecessary drama. Martin then shifts his tone, encouraging Blomqvist to return to Millennium to protect his reputation. However, he eventually agrees to support Blomqvist's efforts to solve Harriet's case. Blomqvist and Salander study the photos Mildred provided. One picture shows a male figure with a red patch on his jacket, but it's too blurry for identification. Blomqvist asks Salander to review the police report on Harriet's case for clues about a possible serial killer. As she skims through it quickly, Blomqvist is impressed by her ability to grasp details so effortlessly. When Salander finishes reading, she suggests investigating Pastor Falk because of the religious connection to the crimes. She notes that Falk was the last person to see Harriet and points out that his parsonage burned down in a fire. Salander also mentions that her research shows serial offenders often have a history of hurting animals or setting fires, behaviors reflected in many of the murders on Harriet's list. After spending a week working together at the cabin, Blomqvist and Salander develop a mutual respect and interest in each other. Blomqvist admires Salander's intelligence, though he finds her socially distant. Salander is surprised by his respect for her and starts feeling comfortable letting her guard down. One evening, she approaches Blomqvist and expresses her interest in becoming closer, assuring him it won't affect their work. They spend the night together. The next morning, Salander discovers something horrifying. The neighborhood cat, Tjorven, Blomqvist's recent companion, has been hurt and left dismembered on the porch. Its body is burned and its head is placed on Salander's motorbike. The gruesome scene convinces Blomqvist and Salander that someone is warning them to stop their investigation. Given the timeline of the crimes from 1949 to 1966 and this recent threat, they speculate there may be 2 culprits, an older person and a younger one. Frode offers to cancel their contract for their safety, but Blomqvist insists on continuing. Salander returns to Stockholm to buy security equipment and checks in with Armansky about continuing her research independently. Armansky supports her and wishes her well. Back at the cabin, Salander installs motion detectors and hidden cameras around the property. Blomqvist visits Pastor Falk, now 72 and living in a nursing home. Falk, who has Alzheimer's, remembers Harriet fondly and expresses concern that she was reading books not included in the Protestant Bible. Puzzled, Blomqvist visits another pastor, Margareta Strand, who explains that these books are part of the Apocrypha, texts often studied by Bible scholars. Blomqvist realizes Harriet may have been researching something important on her own, and her religious interest could hold valuable clues. While jogging through the woods, Blomqvist narrowly escapes danger when gunshots ring out. One bullet grazes his temple, but he carefully sneaks back to his cabin to treat the wound. Furious, he storms over to Cecilia's house and questions her about where she's been recently, as well as the photo of her in Harriet's bedroom. Cecilia denies being the attacker and insists that the blurry figure in the photo is not her. Blomqvist and Selander revisit their theory that two people might be responsible for the crimes. They carefully review the photographs again. Blomqvist starts to believe Cecilia's account, noting her distinct blonde hair and light-colored dress appearing in many of the photos. While discussing the case, Selander surprises Blomqvist by reciting Bible verses from memory. Blomqvist realizes she has a photographic memory. Selander, uncomfortable that he's figured out her secret, quickly leaves the cabin. Blomqvist finds her by the harbor, praises her incredible ability, and offers his friendship without pressuring her to talk. They quietly walk back to the cabin together. On their way home, they stumble upon the Vanger family crypt. Inside, they find disturbing evidence related to the neighborhood cat's injury, which confirms someone is intentionally threatening them. Alarmed, they go to Frode's house, where Blomqvist asks Selander to dig through Vanger Corporation's records. He hopes to find connections between the company and the dates of the crimes. Selander uncovers that Gottfried Vanger was present near the locations of several killings. However, the timeline doesn't fully match since Gottfried died in 1965, while a crime linked to the list happened in 1966. Blomqvist visits Vanger's home and examines old family photo albums that weren't included in Harriet's file. He makes two key discoveries. One photo shows Cecilia and Anita wearing identical dresses, and another shows Martin wearing a jacket with a red patch. Blomqvist concludes that Anita, not Cecilia, was the one who opened Harriet's window, and Martin's appearance at the parade was what upset Harriet, causing her to leave abruptly. Despite solving part of the puzzle, Blomqvist remains unsure of Harriet's ultimate fate. On the day of her disappearance, Martin was stuck on the mainland due to the bridge accident and couldn't reach the island. However, Blomqvist links the 1966 murder to Martin's time at a prep school in Uppsala. Despite sensing danger, Blomqvist decides to confront Martin under the pretense of returning keys to Gottfried's cabin. Expecting him, Martin greets Blomqvist with a gun and forces him into his basement, where he has a hidden chamber. Martin ties him up, injures him, and reveals plans to destroy evidence by burning the cabin. He also plans to trap Selander when she returns. Meanwhile, in the corporate archives, Selander finds a photo of Martin and recognizes him as the man Harriet saw during the parade. She connects him to the crime in Uppsala and rushes back to the cabin. Upon arriving, she notices through surveillance footage that Martin tried to enter the cabin with an older set of keys before turning away. In the basement, Martin brags to Blomqvist about continuing the string of crimes his father Gottfried started. He also reveals a dark past, sharing that his father sexually assaulted him as a child and forced him to witness and participate in his wrongdoings from the age of 14. Blomqvist asks Martin why he harmed Harriet, and Martin admits that he planned to hurt her but was stranded in Hedestad on the day she disappeared. Frustrated that Blomqvist doesn't know Harriet's fate, Martin becomes angry and begins to prepare a cruel punishment. To his shock, Selander bursts into the basement and stops him by hitting him with a golf club. She frees Blomqvist and chases Martin as he tries to escape. Riding her motorbike, Selander follows his car until Martin swerves into the path of an oncoming truck. His car crashes and Martin does not survive. Selander returns to Blomqvist and warns him not to involve the police. She quickly removes any evidence of their presence at Martin's home. Selander retrieves Martin's laptop and two binders full of evidence about his crimes. She also finds two photographs of a young girl and keeps them as clues. She burns the binders and drops the laptop into the river. When Frode arrives to inform them about Martin's death, Selander explains what happened, but insists that neither she nor Blomqvist be mentioned in any police reports. Although shocked, Frode agrees to keep their secret. Grateful, Blomqvist thanks Selander for saving his life. She shows him the photos and they realize the girl in the pictures is Harriet. Blomqvist tells Selander that Gottfried, Martin's father, hurt both his children and that Martin continued to hurt Harriet after Gottfried's death. Selander, visibly upset, argues that no one's past can justify such terrible actions. Blomqvist and Selander conclude that Anita Vanger, the figure seen in Harriet's window, knows more about what happened. They fly to London, where Selander enlists the help of two hacker friends to monitor Anita's phone. Blomqvist visits Anita and asks her to reveal the truth about Harriet, but Anita angrily throws him out. Shortly after, she makes a phone call to Australia. Through their research, they realize the woman on the other end of the call is Harriet, who has been living in Australia under a different name. Blomqvist and Selander plan to travel to Australia, but Selander stays behind when she learns that her mother, who had been in a nursing home, has passed away. Blomqvist continues the journey alone and finds Harriet working on a large sheep ranch owned by the Cochran family. She has been living under the name Anita Cochran. Blomqvist gently introduces himself, reminding Harriet that she once babysat him when he was little. Harriet, shocked to hear her real name, agrees to talk to him. Blomqvist reassures her that his only goal is to inform Henrik of her safety and promises to keep her location a secret. He shares the details of his near-death encounter with Martin and tells her that Martin is no longer a threat. Harriet, relieved, begins to share her story. She explains that her father and brother used to force themselves on her for years, and her mother, Isabella, ignored the situation. On the day of her father's death, Gottfried was drunk and became threatening. Harriet defended herself by pushing him into the water, holding him under with an oar until he drowned. Martin witnessed the event and used it to blackmail her, forcing her to endure his mistreatment until she decided to escape. During the Children's Day parade, Anita smuggled Harriet off the island by hiding her in the backseat of a car. Before leaving, Anita went to Harriet's room to collect her diary and belongings. Harriet then dyed her hair and used Anita's passport to move to Italy, where she eventually met and married her late husband, Spencer Cochran. Now living as Anita Cochran, Harriet feels a sense of closure, knowing that the truth is finally out and her past can no longer hurt her. Blomqvist and Armansky attend Selander's mother's funeral. After the service, Blomqvist drives Selander back to Hedeby to gather her belongings and motorbike. On the way, he tells her about meeting Harriet in Australia. Selander is upset that Harriet didn't speak out against Martin in 1966, believing it could have stopped him from hurting others for decades. Blomqvist explains that Harriet didn't know Martin had continued their father's cruel acts, but Selander struggles to accept this. He invites her to stay in Hedeby with him, but says he will understand if she chooses to leave. After dropping her off, Blomqvist visits Henrik Vanger in the hospital. Henrik is overwhelmed to learn that Harriet is alive and finally realizes she has been sending the pressed flowers every year. Harriet explains that the gifts were her way of letting him know she was safe while staying hidden. The two are joyfully reunited. Blomqvist returns to the cabin, but Selander is gone. Selander leaves Hedeby, overwhelmed by her anger at the Vangers and the grief of losing her mother. The unanswered questions about her past and the pain of her childhood weigh heavily on her. As she drives, she reflects on her relationship with Blomqvist and recognizes that her frustration with him is misplaced. Realizing he has always respected her independence, she decides to return to Hedeby. Back at the cabin, Blomqvist tells Selander he values their friendship and hopes she will trust him in time. They reconcile and spend the evening together. The next morning, Frode arrives with a letter from Henrik. The letter requests that Blomqvist keep quiet about the crimes committed by Gottfried and Martin, offering financial compensation in return. Blomqvist is offended by the offer, but Selander points out that exposing the truth would only harm Harriet further, forcing her to relive her painful past. As a compromise, Selander insists that Henrik compensate the families of Martin's victims and make annual donations to women's crisis centers. Blomqvist reluctantly agrees. Blomqvist then learns that Henrik never had sufficient evidence to expose Wennerström. Disheartened, he confides in Selander, who surprises him with a solution. She had continued investigating Wennerström and now has all the proof Blomqvist needs on her laptop. She hacked Wennerström's computer using a special device to copy his hard drive. The data reveals Wennerström's involvement in global corruption, including fraudulent companies and hidden bank accounts. Soon after, Blomqvist discovers that Jana Dahlman, Millennium's managing editor, has been secretly working for Wennerström. Blomqvist devises a plan to mislead both Dahlman and Wennerström, making it appear that the magazine is struggling. This distraction buys Blomqvist time to focus on writing his expose. During this time, he avoids contacting Berger, feeling guilty for agreeing to cover up the Vanger family's crimes. Blomqvist moves to his cabin to concentrate on his work. Harriet, now on the Millennium board, emails him updates and informs him she has met Berger. Selander later joins Blomqvist at the cabin, and they settle into a comfortable routine. Inspired by Wennerström's cruelty, including how he mistreated a former partner, Selander decides to take action against him. After weeks of effort, Blomqvist and Selander return to Stockholm. Selander meets Berger, who is impressed by the vast amount of information Selander uncovered. Berger warmly hugs her, but Selander, noticing Berger's sophistication and charm, feels certain they will never become close friends. Selander spends a month planning a way to take money from Wennerström's personal bank account in the Cayman Islands. To carry out her plan, she needs money and asks Blomqvist for a loan, claiming she plans to invest it. Blomqvist tells her he intends to share his payment from Vanger with her, but she refuses to accept it. Instead, she borrows 120,000 kroner from him and flies to Zurich, carrying 2 fake passports. She checks into 2 fancy hotels under fake names. Using clever disguises, fake alibis, and her sharp skills, Selander manages to steal steal millions of dollars from Wennerström's accounts and hide the money in several secret accounts. After returning to Sweden, she gets rid of all the evidence and takes a well-deserved break after her high-risk operation. Finally, Blomqvist publishes his exposé on Wennerström and releases his book The Mafia Banker a few days later. The media frenzy that follows eventually settles in favor of Blomqvist and Millennium. Blomqvist believes the media should focus on exposing the wrongdoings of people like Wennerström, whose business empire was connected to illegal activities, rather than praising them. Wennerström disappears and Salander tracks his movements through his computer. When the Swedish authorities stop searching for him after 6 months, she secretly informs one of the people Wennerström owes money to. 4 days later, Wennerström is found in Spain, dead from gunshots. Blomqvist reads in the Financial Times about a woman who helped Wennerström flee with his stolen money. When he sees the photo of the woman, he laughs out loud when he realizes it's Salander. On Christmas Eve, Blomqvist visits his ex-wife and daughter Pernilla and then meets Salander to spend the holidays at his cabin. Salander admits to herself that she has fallen in love with Blomqvist, and the thought scares her, so she pulls away at the end of their trip. After Christmas, Blomqvist visits Vanger, who finalizes his payment and tells him that Harriet will take over as the head of Vanger Corporation. Since Blomqvist has agreed to keep the family's secrets, he decides there's no point in publishing the edited version of the family history. He feels conflicted and discouraged. Vanger tells Blomqvist that he doesn't believe anyone could bribe him and that he is choosing to act as a human being over being just a journalist. Back in Stockholm, Salander decides to start fresh. She cleans up her apartment, throwing away years of clutter. She decides to tell Blomqvist how she feels, overcoming her fear of rejection. On her way to his apartment, she buys him a Christmas gift. However, when she sees him leaving with Berger, his arm around Blomqvist's waist, she feels angry. She imagines hurting Berger, but takes a deep breath and calms herself. She calls herself foolish and walks home, throwing his gift away. The story ends here. As mentioned at the beginning, this is part of a trilogy and the main characters stay the same throughout, solving mysteries and experiencing how their relationships evolve. Blomqvist starts the novel as an idealist but ends with a more complicated view of right and wrong. He breaks his journalistic oath to expose the truth and instead covers up Gottfried's and Martin's crimes to protect Harriet. His decision to keep the murders a secret comes from his compassion and desire to protect Harriet from reliving her trauma in the media. After his own harrowing experience with Martin, where he nearly lost his life, Blomqvist understands how important privacy is for survivors of trauma. However, he struggles with his guilt over hiding the truth about the family's crimes. By doing so, he denies the victims' families the justice they deserve and maintains a false image of the Vanger family. Blomqvist's sense of ethics evolves and he begins to think beyond just exposing everything to the media. He starts to understand the consequences of revealing the truth and even adopts some of Salander's methods for seeking justice, using her hacked materials to bring down Wennerström without hesitation. In the end, trust, like justice, is a fragile concept for Salander. After being hurt by people who should have cared for her, Salander learned to trust Blomqvist and even Berger, sharing her identity as their source. In a moment of personal growth, she realizes that she has fallen in love with Blomqvist. At first, she resents the feeling, seeing it as something that makes her vulnerable. Much like Blomqvist feels that Vanger managed to corrupt him, Salander feels that Blomqvist has corrupted her by breaking down the walls she built around herself. She is learning how to open up and be human. For the first time in her life, she's fallen in love, and this shows she's ready to feel secure and supported, an important step in healing from her past trauma. The novel highlights how crimes against women often go unnoticed or unreported, and how many murders remain unsolved. That's it for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, make sure to like the video and share it with friends. While you're at it, consider subscribing to our channel. I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.